Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Bipul, and today we're going to talk about the Pigbeans web application, how it has been deployed to the web server, and what are the configurations or the DevOps tools that the application is using. So let's go over some review about the Pigbeans web application. It's a cross-platform application to manage schedule, to notify the user about the arrival time of the pickup vehicle. So the application is just about on-demand service, or just you can just take an example of Uber Eats. So it's like an on-demand service. So the application is based on Node.js, Express.js, and React.js frameworks, and it is built including backend RESTful API and the front-end web app and mobile app on cross platforms. We are not really worried about the mobile apps at the moment. We are only deploying the web application using the recent DevOps tools. So for the pipeline, the application is integrated first through Jenkins and provision the infrastructure using Terraform. So here Jenkins is our main centralized integration tool, and Terraform is a provisional tool as an infrastructure provision tool. And we automated the system tasks with Ansible and containerized application with Docker. Here Ansible is our centralized configuration management tool, and Docker is to create images and deploy into the container. And the application containers are configured using Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is also a container configuration tool. So, and finally the application is deployed into the Nginx web server. So what are the technology requirements? So here the application is deployed on AWS, Amazon Web Services, as a service provider and networking. So this AWS plays as a role as a service provider and as a network provider. So for the source code management and version control, Git is used, and Jenkins is used to integrate the whole CI/CD pipeline, like I mentioned before. And Ansible is used to automate the system task or the server tasks of the application, and the Docker to create an image for all the required services and containerize it in the Docker registry. So for this project, Docker Hub is used as a Docker registry, right? So at last, Kubernetes is used to manage the containers and deploy this each of the services into the Nginx server. So basically all services are deployed into the Nginx server. Now basically the services that are deployed into the front end is deployed into the Nginx server, and Nginx is used here because Nginx has a unique feature that we can talk to the backend service using the proxy pass data type using Nginx web server. So that's why the key part of the Nginx server comes. We're gonna talk about that later in the coding part. So for the server requirements in the AWS, I created 3 servers: server 1, 2, and 3. In server 1, Jenkins and Ansible are installed and configured, so they are called Jenkins and Ansible server, where all our Jenkins job resides and Ansible can perform the system or server task. And then server 2 is for Docker host and the Kubernetes worker node. So for the Docker host, application client and server images are created and deployed into the registry into Docker Hub. So also the worker node is the Kubernetes, is where the Kubernetes master deploy its services or its deployments. Kubernetes master is where all our services comes along. That means we're gonna create deployment, we're gonna create service into the Kubernetes master or server 3. So for this test purpose, for this simple deployment purpose, we only used one worker node. We can have multiple worker node and use a load balancer, and then load balancer will automatically find running up and running that the server that are available to deploy our application, and the load balancer will automatically deploy to that server. But by default, our application is gonna deploy on this server 2 or the Kubernetes worker node, because we only have one worker node at the moment. So here in Node, I mentioned that in Jenkins you need to install publish over SSH plugin to transfer files and to execute any Ansible playbooks on the different servers. So basically what this means is you need to have publish over SSH plugin into Jenkins, so that your server is gonna communicate between each others, and then it will execute some Ansible playbooks into different servers from one server. Because here our Ansible server is server 1, so how we can communicate with server 2 and server 3 to execute the configuration or to make a deployment of our application. So you have to have some kind of medium, right? So publish over SSH will help you to communicate between to make a communication between different servers and execute your task or system task. So going over the CI/CD pipeline, first our Git, Jenkins will pull the source code from Git, and then Jenkins will make a deployment. Configure with, integrate with Ansible, and then Ansible will configure to make a deployment or make an image and then deploy into the Docker Hub, into the Docker registry. So here for the CI purpose, we are using Jenkins as a major integration tool. So that will first get the source code from Git and then push the images to the Docker through Ansible. So Ansible will configure here to create an image, build an image, and then push it into the Docker registry too. For the CI/CD purpose, we are using Kubernetes, as I mentioned before, and Ansible will configure the Kubernetes task, and then it will make a deployment to the Nginx web server. So Kubernetes will pull the Docker images that was first configured from Ansible, and then Kubernetes will deploy the application to the Nginx web server. So that's our whole CI/CD plan. So going over to the project, let's go to the VS Code, and then here in the backend, here is a Docker file. So in the Docker file, we're creating a node image. So I used Alpine as a version because it will create our image as a lightweight image. So we don't want to make our image to be heavy. So we're just making a lightweight image. So we're creating a working directory, and then we're copying the package.json file to the working directory, and we're using npm install, since npm is our node package manager, and our application is based on Node. Like I mentioned before, it is based on Node. So we have to install all the dependencies and packages that our application is using. So npm install will install all the Node modules, everything into the image, and then copy all the Node modules and all the directories to the working directory here into the image. So we are exposing 4000 as our port here to make our container run at 4000. So we are using entry point node and command index.js. We're using entry point here because we are trying to make our image to be executable, so that our front end will communicate with our backend service. So that's the Docker file. For the Kubernetes deployment file, here you don't have to be like expert on Kubernetes deployments. So just for the basics, here we're using kind deployment, and we're giving name, we're giving replicas 2. That means we're making a 2 copy of the deployment, and then we're giving a metadata name, match labels name, and then another metadata name. It just remains the same. You don't have to worry about that. And here is the major part where you have to pull the image from the Docker. So you deploy image from here, right? So then Ansible will configure your tag name and everything, and then push it to the Docker registry, right? So from Kubernetes, and the Kubernetes plays a role where you can pull the image from that Docker registry and then make the deployment of that image to the Nginx server. So for the backend, here we are exposing the container port, using the container port 4000 that we use in the Docker file, right? So we're gonna use the same container port, and we're gonna make a deployment of that image, right? So image pull policy, if not present, that means if there is no current image named as pigbean server in the current server that we're deploying the app, then if there is not, then it's not gonna it's gonna pull from the Docker registry. If there is some located into that server, then it's not gonna pull from Docker registry. It's just gonna use the same image from the server. So into the service.yaml, here we're using service instead of deployment. So metadata, it's going to be the service name and the port 4000, target port 4000, and the name selector is the app, Pigbean server app. This is coming from the deployment here. We are deploying this deployment as a service, so that this service will be executed, or listened by our front end server. So if I go to the front end and look at the Docker file of the front end, then we're gonna see that we are still using the Node Alpine to make it lightweight, and we are giving the tag because we are using this tag later in the Nginx server to be deployed. So we are creating a working directory, and then we are copying all the package.json and yarn.log to the working directory, and then we are using ronyan to make our to build the application, and we are copying all the source code to the current directory, and we are using ronyan build to make to build our application and create an artifact for our front-end application. So until now, our front-end application image has been created and stored in this name tag, and then we are starting another image, Nginx image, from here. So it's going to ignore all the images that are that has been executed until now, but it's gonna take this tag later in this image. So here I'm using Nginx latest version, and then I'm copying the image build artifacts from the client build directory to this directory, the Nginx HTML, where our front-end application will be deployed. So we're removing the default config file of our Nginx, and we're copying the Nginx config file that we have created to the default directory. So the Nginx config file we created here is here. So here what we are doing is we're listening to the port 80 because Nginx will listen to 80 by default, and we're using the server name as the localhost, and we're the basic or the main part of the Nginx config file is that, or Nginx server is that we are passing the we're passing the API call from here using proxy pass, and we're giving the link where our API call has been passed. So that will pass to the backend service here. Backend service is located here, and using the port 4000. That's 4000 is the container port that we are using here too, because our front-end application should listen to the backend service too, right? So we are using Nginx proxy pass to make an API call. So any other calls other than API call will just go over here and then make the front-end calls. Any other than these calls then gives us the error message. Sorry. So that's for the Nginx. And if we go to the deployment of our front end, we're using the same thing here, 2 replicas, and we're using rolling update to make updates in the future, any updates that we make into Kubernetes. So we're giving name here, and then here's the container. We are using the client because we deployed this image into the Docker registry, right? So we are pulling from there, and we're using the same here. We're using container port 80 here. So for the service, we're using Pigbean service, and we're using the load balancer here, and we're using the app that is selector as client app here, right? So that's our service for Kubernetes front end. And if we look at the API calls in the front end, then if we look at here in the source code into the components, and let's say in the author.js, well, how did we call the API? I mean, here I use the directory as /API/user/login, because Nginx, we're using Nginx here because Nginx will make our API call. This will make a call to the backend service and then execute the output that is requested by the user. And here also I used API calls using Nginx, and /API, where the Nginx server will call this /API and make a communication to the backend service. So that's we made the communication between backend and front end. So if we go to the Jenkins job, here is our Jenkins job, right? So Jenkins is our major tool to make a integration between front end and back end, and all the configuration to the from integrating our building our application to the deployment. So first, if we go to the back end and then look at the configuration, and here what we're doing is we're first cloning all the source code from GitHub, and then we're using git SCM polling for any trigger for any future changes or any updated version of the source code. So here we're using publish over SSH tool, the plugin in Jenkins, so to make our communication between different servers, right? So here first I use our Docker host from the Jenkins will copy all the backend data to the Docker host, right? And then all the data will, the double asterisk means all the directory and subdirectories located in this directory will be copied to our this directory opt/bigbin server into the Docker host, and in Ansible host we'll copy all the Ansible directory data into this directory, and then after that it will execute the pb server container.yaml. It will take the inventory host that we created in the host file, and then it will execute this file that has been copied to the server to the Ansible host. So that's for the server. If we go to the client, then it's almost the same thing here. We're using the git clone here, and we're copying the front end data and the front end source code to the current directory, that is bigbin's client, and then we're copying the Ansible data and then executing the Ansible client container, right? And we're requesting the other bigbin's deployment to run after that. So if you go to the bigbin's deployment, look at the configuration, and here also we're doing the same thing, and we're copying the .yaml file to the Kubernetes host, not the Docker host, because Docker host is building our image and packages and deploying into the Docker registry, but Kubernetes host will be our deployment of the application, right? So we're using Kubernetes host and copying the .yaml, that's the deployment.yaml and service.yaml to the working directory, and then here it's using the front-end .yaml and deployment.yaml and service.yaml and copied to the bigbin's client, sorry. And then finally the Ansible host, from Ansible host, what it will do is it will execute our deployment configuration file, Ansible playbooks, should I say. So it will use the host where should the playbook should configure or execute it, and then it will execute the configuration file. So that's the 3 jobs that has been set up. So if we look at the first execute the server, before executing, let me show you something. So this is our main server, so this is our server 1, that is Ansible and Jenkins server. This is our worker node or the Docker host, and this is our master node or the Kubernetes master server. So if we say kubectl get nodes, then our nodes, worker node and the master node, are ready for deployment, right? So if you look at the kubectl get pods, so there is no pods running at the moment. Service, only the Kubernetes default service is working at the moment, nothing is here. And let's see at the Docker host if there is any images that has been created. I should use sudo. Nothing yet. Okay, there is only one node alpine. Okay, that's what's from the previous task. Okay, there is no images here that has been created. So let's run our first job, that is Pigmin server. Let's build it. Yeah, the data has been already copied to the Docker host, and it's executing our Ansible playbook here. It got the host, that is worker node, that is this node, worker node, that is our Docker host, right? You have to mention the host, the host name into the host file in the Ansible playbooks, so that it will gather the facts, that is the worker node, and they're on the Ansible playbooks, or execute the Ansible playbooks. So here it says changed. It has been pushing, I think. First it built a Pigmin server. Yeah, it is success right now. So what it did was it first copied all the data to the Docker host, and then from the Docker host, from Ansible server to the Docker host, right? So from the Ansible server, it has been executing the Ansible playbook, and it has been executed, and changes are made, 4 of the changes, and it has been pushed. Let's go and run the Pigmin's client. It has been running. This one's a Pigmin's client. Let me make sure. Yeah, this is Pigmin's client. Yeah, all the data has been copied, and it's running the Ansible playbook. If you look at the Ansible, worker node at the Docker host, if you do Docker images, see what we did was we created here 40 seconds ago. What it did was it first created an image, then pushed it in Docker registry, and deleted the image from this server because we don't want to use any more space here. So it's removing this image, or deleting this image. Because if you look at the, sorry, I forgot to show you this one. This is the Ansible playbooks, where first server deployment has been made, right? So this is our client server. That means client server is our worker node, right? That worker node that I mentioned before is this one, client server. So in the in the client server here, what we're doing is we're using docker build command to build our application, and then build in this directory, and then we're tagging that image to push into the Docker hub, and then we push it, and after pushing to the Docker hub, we're removing the image from our server because we don't want to take any more space in the server. So in the client too, we're doing the same thing. We're building, we're tagging, and we're pushing and removing from the server. And the deployment here is it is done in the Kubernetes server rather than the Docker host, right? Here the Kubernetes server is the master node. Master node is this one, the Kubernetes server. So in the master node, we're using kubectl apply for the server deployment, for the service, for the server deployment, and also the client deployment, and also the client service. So we are running this command into the Kubernetes server, so to make the deployment of our application. If we look at the Jenkins job, okay, if we look at the Pigmin's client and build it again, let's see, I think it ran, it says unstable because of some internet problem. Let's see, all the data has been copied first. Yeah, all the files has been copied to the Ansible, Docker host, and it is success right now. Yeah, and the Ansible playbook has been executed. It built the image, the front-end image, and tagged the image and pushed it into the Docker hub, and deleted from the server, from the worker node. So if we go to the Pigmin's deployment and run it, it should run automatically. Let's see, I don't know, it's not running for some reason. Let's go to the dashboard and Pigmin's deployment, and let's build it for now. So all the .yaml file has been copied to the Kubernetes server, and it says master node, that is our Kubernetes server, and then this is all our Ansible playbook that is running at the moment. So it first create and deploy the Pigmin server that is happening in our master node, and deploying the server service, and also the deploying the Pigmin's client, and then the client service. So it has been deployed, no fail. It says changed 4, nothing has been failed or something. So it ran to success, you can see in the output. So let's see in the Kubernetes master if it's working. Let's see first in the Docker host what's if there is any other images that it has been residing. So here it says latest about a minute ago, Pigmin's client image has been created and then pushed into the Docker hub. If we look at the Docker hub and see if there are any images that has been pushed recently, yeah, it says 2 minutes and 5 minutes ago, Pigmin server first has been pushed into the hub, and then later the client has been pushed. So if we go to the Kubernetes server now, and let's see, kubectl get pods, here our 2 replicas, that is 2 of the copy of our client and 2 of the copy of our server has been deployed, and it is up and running. And if we get the service, yeah, it says pending because it's still running, I think, and then it's exposed to the port 31432, and it's using the type load balancer because we mentioned load balancer in our Pigmin's client, and it's using cluster IP by default because we didn't mention any type in the service.yaml file for the backend. So if we go to the this is our AWS console where these 3 servers are located. Deployment server is our Ansible server or the Jenkins server, and this is our Kubernetes slave node, and then the Docker host, this is our Kubernetes master node. So if by default our Kubernetes master node will deploy our application to this server because we only have 1 server at the moment. If we had multiple servers, then it's gonna mention that the IP address of the server where our application has been deployed, due to the use of load balancer. Load balancer plays a vital role on the deployment of our application to different, or when we have multiple servers. So if we get the IP address, the public IP address of this server, and use the port 31432, right? 31432. And look at it. There you go. Our application is running. So this is our front end for our application. If we log in as an admin, let's log in as a driver first. Driver 1. Sorry, sim.com. There you go. These are the list for the driver, where the driver has to make the stops and then pick up the trash from these locations. So these are the requests from the user. So if the driver is done, you can just delete it and then go to the next stop that has to be made. So for log out right now, let's log in as admin. Okay, let's log in as admin. Let's see. There you go. Okay, so this is a admin home. These are the drivers where the driver has to go. These are the list, and then these are the users. These are the driver list, and admin can generate list to the driver or assign list to the driver. There you go. Our application is up and running. So you need to remember that you need to first make a here I use Ansible admin as a user to communicate between all the servers, right? So you need to create some kind of user to make a communication from different clients. So this is our main Ansible server, and the Ansible server will look for Ansible admin to any other server and then make a communication. So you need to make a SSH, like a public key encryption to make a communication between these 3 different servers to make a client server communication, right? So you need to first create key for SSH, let's say key Jane, like this, and then take the public key from here and copy that public key to this server and to this server, right? So that will be the that's how you can make a communication between the different clients from one server and execute our Ansible playbooks. So that's how we did it over here, so we can use the same approach. So that's it for now. Our application is up and running, so that's all I did for deploying this deploying the PigBeans application. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm gonna put some of the documentation, how we can configure Kubernetes, Docker, Ansible, Jenkins, and how you can work into AWS, creating let's say creating EC2 instances to use for application deployment. So if you have any other questions, just let me know. Thank you so much.